Hey everyone, if you enjoy my park ranger horror stories, I've started uploading them on Spotify too. My YouTube channel got demonetized, so I'm putting a lot more focus into Spotify now. You'll find daily scary stories there with longer, darker, and more immersive horror content. If you want to support the channel, please go follow the Spotify page and leave a 5-star rating. It genuinely helps me keep making these stories. The Spotify link is in the description and pinned comment. Turn off the lights. Put on your headphones, and I'll see you there. The truck sat at the bottom of my tower stairs for exactly 4 minutes. I know because I counted. I was standing at my observation window on the second level with my binoculars up, watching it. A full-size white pickup, headlights off, engine running. I could see the exhaust rising in the cold night air, gray smoke curling against the dark line of the trees. The access road curved up from the valley and ended in a small clearing right at the base of my stairs, and that truck was parked dead center in that clearing, and nobody was getting out. They just sat there. After 4 minutes, the truck backed slowly down the road and disappeared into the trees. I have thought about those 4 minutes almost every single day since that night. 4 minutes is a long time to sit outside someone's door in the dark without getting out of the vehicle. 4 minutes is enough time for someone to decide something. I just never found out what they decided about me. Let me back up, because if I just describe that one night, it won't mean much to you. You need to understand what I had been watching for the 2 weeks before it happened. You need to understand what that road was, and what I was seeing on it, and how slow I was to understand what any of it meant. I was a fire lookout in the Bitterroot National Forest in western Montana. That was my second summer in that job. The summer all of this happened. My tower was on a ridge in the southern part of the forest, sitting at about 7,400 feet. I had been a wildland firefighter for 8 years before that real field work, deployment crews. The whole thing until I blew out my knee on a slope in eastern Oregon and had surgery and went through rehab and then got the news that I couldn't do that work anymore, not the way it needed to be done. The lookout job came through a contact in the Forest Service. It's not a job most people want. You live in a small cab at the top of a metal tower for 4 or 5 months. You wake up, scan the ridgelines for smoke, log your weather readings, call in your reports, and then do it again. That's the job. Some days nothing happens at all. I liked it. After 8 years of crew work and tent living and going days without real sleep, the quiet felt like something I needed. I had my books, my weather instruments, my radio, and a view that people pay good money to drive hours to see on a clear day. From the tower, on a good morning, I could see parts of 3 different valleys. I could see 2 ridgelines to the west and a section of mountains to the north that went purple in the early light. And I could see the fire road. That road ran through the valley directly below me. It was a 2-track dirt service road. Forest Service roads always are connecting Pete Dolan's Lower Ranger Station on the west end to a county road about 14 miles to the east. Locked gates at both ends. The locks weren't heavy duty. Anyone with bolt cutters could get through them in 30 seconds. The road existed so maintenance vehicles could move through the forest without using the main highway. It was practical and unglamorous, and it showed up on every Forest Service map, but nobody outside the agency really thought about it. I could see about 8 or 9 miles of it from my window. I wasn't watching it on purpose. It was just there. The way everything in the valley below was just there, part of the scenery I looked at every day. The only person I saw on that road with any regularity was Jesse Trujillo. Jesse was a seasonal maintenance worker, early 20s, from Missoula. He did trail clearing and road grading, which meant most of his days were spent driving a small work truck and a piece of road equipment up and down through the valley. I'd catch him through my binoculars, sometimes just a small dot of orange vest, moving slow along the road below. We talked on the radio when he was working in my sector. He was quiet, had a dry sense of humor that took a while to notice. He'd been seasonal for 2 summers and was working toward applying for a permanent position with the Forest Service. He took the job seriously. The other person I had regular contact with was Pete Dolan, the ranger at the lower station. Pete was in his 50s, 30 years with the Forest Service, good at his job and clearly distracted that summer. He was going through a custody battle with his ex-wife. He mentioned it sometimes on slow radio days, not in a dramatic way, just the way a person mentions something that's sitting heavy on them. I didn't mind listening. That was my world. The tower, the view, Pete's voice on the radio, Jesse's orange vest moving along the road below. That was the summer, right up until the Tuesday afternoon in mid-July when I saw the white truck for the first time. I was logging my afternoon weather readings: temperature, humidity, wind speed, cloud cover. I had the binoculars resting on the windowsill, and I was looking at the ridgeline to the west when movement on the fire road pulled my eye down. A white pickup truck had pulled over near a wide, flat section of road, the kind of spot trucks sometimes used to turn around. A person got out of the passenger side. I put the binoculars on them. Looked like a man, light jacket, couldn't make out much more than that from that distance. He walked about 10 feet away from the truck and just stood there on the side of the road. Then the white truck drove away. The man stood there for maybe 3 minutes, just standing. Then a dark SUV came from the east end, from the county road direction. The man got in. The SUV left back the way it came. The whole thing was over in 8 minutes. I wrote it in my personal notebook, not my official weather log, just a journal I kept for myself. I wrote something like, saw what looked like a planned vehicle exchange on the fire road, around mile marker 7. 2 vehicles, 1 person on foot between them. Seemed organized. I didn't call it in. I thought about it and decided it wasn't worth bothering Pete. Over. People use those fire roads sometimes without permits. Hunters, mushroom pickers, locals who knew the shortcuts. Unusual things happened in the backcountry all the time. I had been a firefighter. I had seen stranger. I told myself it was probably nothing. 3 days later, it happened again. Same white truck, same section of road. Same pattern: truck pulls over. Person gets out of the passenger side. Truck leaves. Different vehicle comes from the east. Person gets in, vehicle leaves. Different person this time. And this time I had my binoculars on them the whole way through. It was a woman, maybe late 20s, hard to say at that distance. Light-colored shirt, no backpack, no gear, nothing that said hiker or hunter. She stood by the road and looked in both directions a couple of times. When the second vehicle, a dark blue SUV, different from the one 3 days before, pulled up and stopped, she didn't get in right away. She stood there, just for a moment, looking at the SUV. Then she got in. That pause, that's what stayed with me. That small hesitation. I radioed Pete. Pete, quick question. Has anyone been issued permits for the fire road below my ridge, around mile marker 7? A couple seconds of static. Not that I know of. Why? Why? I've seen vehicle exchanges down there twice now in the past few days. Someone drops a person off, a second vehicle comes from the other direction and picks them up. Both times seemed very planned. People cut the gate sometimes, he said. Hunters, berry pickers, probably nothing. Yeah, probably. I signed off, but I kept watching the road. A week later, the third time, I was ready. Binoculars on the window, notebook open, pen in hand, same white truck, same wide spot on the road. This time, the person who got out was young, could have been a teenager, honestly. Small, moving slowly, light jacket. They walked a short distance from the truck and stood very still while they waited. There was something about the way they moved that I could not name exactly. Not scared, not relaxed. Just going through the motions of something. Like they knew what was going to happen next and had already made peace with it. I wrote down everything. Time, location, truck direction, clothing. I could make out everything. 3 incidents. Same white pickup, same location. Different people each time. Different pickup vehicles each time. That night, I called the county sheriff's department on my personal phone. 1 bar of service up on the tower. I described what I had seen. The deputy was polite. He said they'd make a report and that if I could give them more specific information, license plates, clearer vehicle descriptions, they'd follow up. I told him I was trying. The next morning, on my day off, I drove down from the tower and walked out to the spot on the fire road. Tire tracks in the soft dirt, multiple sets. 4 cigarette butts in the grass at the edge of the road, all the same brand, all fairly fresh. And then, half buried in the tall grass a few feet from the road, a phone. A cheap prepaid phone. Screen cracked. I picked it up with the hem of my shirt. I didn't think too hard about why. It was just instinct and turned it on. No password. No contacts. No call history. No text messages. Just 1 saved number with no name attached to it. I put it back exactly where I found it. I took a photo with my own phone. Then I drove back up to the tower. I told Pete everything. He called the district ranger that same day. The district ranger's response, from what Pete relayed, was that they would put it on the radar, but they didn't have the staff to monitor service roads. Remote fire roads throughout a 1.6 million acre forest don't get watched. There's nobody to watch them. The suggestion was that I should focus on fire watch and let law enforcement handle the roads. Which law enforcement, exactly, I didn't ask. The county sheriff who needed more information before they could act? The district ranger who didn't have the resources? There was a gap somewhere between those two answers, and I was sitting at the top of a tower watching something happen right in the middle of that gap. A few days after that, Jesse mentioned the truck. We were on the radio while he was doing some grading work to the north, just talking between tasks, the way we did. I mentioned what I'd been seeing, and he got quiet for a second. "White pickup?" he said. "Yeah, big, full size. I saw one like that a few weeks back, before you ever mentioned it. I was working a stretch of road up north, and it was parked off to the side, tucked in against the tree line. I drove past, and the driver looked away, like deliberately looked away. Did you notice the plates?" "Nevada," he said. I remember thinking that was weird. Nobody from Nevada is coming up here to pick mushrooms. I wrote that down. Nevada plates. Same white truck. I called the sheriff's department again, gave them the updated description, the partial information about Nevada plates, told them about the prepaid phone. They said they'd send someone to collect it. A week later, Pete told me they had. I never found out what they did with the information. The fourth time the truck appeared, everything shifted. Same exchange, same location. Different person, different pickup vehicle. But this time, after the exchange was finished and the second vehicle left, the white truck didn't turn around and leave the way it usually did. It drove east, toward the county road end of the fire road. Slow. Much slower than you'd drive if you were just leaving. And then it stopped. It stopped at a section of road that sat directly below my ridge. I mean directly. If you stood at that spot on the road and looked up at the right angle, you could see the top of my tower against the sky. I had looked down at that spot from my window 100 times without thinking about it. The truck sat there. I put my binoculars on it. I couldn't see the driver clearly. The windows caught the light wrong. I could see the shape of the cab, the line of the roof, the small movement of exhaust from the tailpipe. 4 minutes. Then it drove away. My hands were shaking when I got on the radio to Pete. Not from cold, it was the middle of summer. My hands were shaking because standing at my window in broad daylight watching that truck sit at that spot, I felt something I hadn't felt out there before. Exposed. The truck stopped below my ridge after the exchange today, I told Pete. Sat there for about 4 minutes. Sat still? Like it broke down? No. Like it was looking at something. Pete was quiet for a moment. "Karen, you want me to drive up?" "Not tonight." "But Pete, I need you to push harder on the sheriff. Something is happening on that road. I don't know what exactly, but it is not hunters and it is not mushroom pickers." He said he'd make calls. He meant it. That night, after 11, I heard an engine on the access road. My tower had its own dirt access road that came up from the valley, about a mile long, gated at the bottom with a Forest Service padlock. Same kind of lock you'd find on 100 different gates throughout the Bitterroot. Standard padlock, weathered chain. I first thought it might be Pete coming up, which would have been unusual at that hour, but not impossible. I keyed up his radio channel. "Pete, are you coming up the access road?" "No, I'm home." "Why?" "I can hear a vehicle." "Stay put. I'll call the county." I turned off my lights, stood at the window in the dark. The headlights came up through the trees below me, moving slow. The gate was at the first bend, about 400 yards from the base of the tower. The headlights stopped there. Then I heard it, a sound I couldn't place for a second, soft and metallic, like a chain being worked. The headlights moved again. The vehicle came up the last stretch and pulled into the clearing at the base of my tower stairs. They had cut the lock. The vehicle parked right below me. From my angle, I couldn't see it cleanly. A full-size pickup, light-colored, that much I could tell. The engine kept running. The headlights went off. Nobody got out. I stood there in the dark of my cab, flashlight off, radio in one hand and my personal phone in the other. 1 bar of service. I was at 7,400 feet on a ridge in the middle of the Bitterroot, alone, and someone had cut the lock off the gate on my access road and driven up in the middle of the night and was sitting at the bottom of my stairs with the engine running and nobody was getting out. I did not move. 4 minutes. Then the truck backed slowly down the road and was gone. I stood at that window for another 20 minutes before I was able to stop counting my own heartbeat. Pete came up at first light the next morning. He walked around the base of the tower without saying much. He looked at the cut lock. He looked at the tire tracks in the soft dirt at the base of the stairs. He looked at the boot prints, 2 sets, both large, both men probably. They got out, I said, from the top of the stairs. He looked up at me. You didn't see them from the window? Wrong angle. But those prints weren't there yesterday. He got on his radio and called the district office. I heard the whole conversation. The district ranger said the word federal within the first minute. He said it was time to bring in the FBI. That was the first time that word had come up. I told Pete I was staying on the tower. Karen, I know what you're going to say, but if I leave, whoever is running that road knows the watching stopped, and I'm not sure that makes things better. He looked at me for a long moment and then nodded. I had a trail camera I'd bought the previous spring to watch for bears near the tower, never ended up using it. I set it up on a tree about 50 feet down the access road, aimed at the gate before Pete left that morning. 2 nights later, at 2:07 inches the morning, the camera triggered. A white pickup, full-size, Nevada plates. I could read 3 of the letters before the camera angle cut the rest off. 2 men got out. They stood at the base of the access road, both of them looking up toward the tower. They talked for a couple of minutes. I couldn't hear anything. Then they got back in and drove away. I brought the camera card down to the sheriff's department myself the next morning. The partial plate came back to a rental company in Reno, Nevada. The sheriff's deputy I spoke with had a different look on his face than the one I'd dealt with before. Focused. He made a phone call while I was still sitting there. 2 days after that, Pete told me the FBI had made contact and that I should expect a visit. I thought it was finally over. I thought, now things move. Now it gets handled. Jesse Trujillo didn't show up for his shift on a Thursday morning in August. His supervisor called Pete because Jesse's work sector was in the valley below my ridge. Pete radioed me. Jesse missed a day before? He asked. Not once that I know of. He's always out early. They checked his seasonal housing cabin first. He wasn't there. His truck was found that afternoon, parked at a trailhead 6 miles from the fire road. The truck was locked. No keys found inside or anywhere nearby. His orange safety vest was folded on the passenger seat. Folded neatly. I keep coming back to that detail. If you're going for a hike on your day off, you don't fold your work vest and leave it on the seat. You either bring it or you leave it crumpled. You don't fold it. You fold something when you're putting it aside carefully, when you know you're not coming back for it soon. A search team worked the area around the trailhead for 4 days. Dogs, grid patterns, the whole thing. They found no tracks leading away from the truck. No gear anywhere in the surrounding trails. No sign of Jesse. The FBI folded his disappearance into the Fire Road investigation. I was pulled off the tower and taken to Pete's station for a full debrief. I sat across from 2 federal agents for 3 hours and told them everything I had seen, and when I had seen it and every note in my journal, I gave them the trail camera footage. I gave them my photographs. I gave them everything. After that, I never went back to the tower. I moved to Bozeman when the summer ended. I took a job at a sporting goods store. In late October, Pete called me. He told me what he'd been cleared to tell me, which wasn't much. A federal trafficking investigation had built a case around a network of routes running through national forests in Montana, Idaho, and Nevada. The fire roads, not just the one below my tower, but others like it throughout the region, had been used to move people. The system worked because those roads were invisible. Too remote, too spread out, too many of them for any agency to monitor. The staged vehicle breakdowns were handoff points, out of sight of any highway, out of range of any camera. Several arrests had been made. Pete didn't know how many, or if he did, he wasn't saying. I asked about Jesse. He was quiet for a moment. Still open, he said. County has it as an open missing persons. That's it. That's all I know. Karen. We said goodbye, and I put the phone down on my kitchen table and sat there for a while. I think about Jesse often. He was out on those roads every day, working his sector, probably passing the white truck here and there, and not giving it a second thought because why would he? He was a 23-year-old seasonal worker who liked his job and took it seriously and was saving up to go permanent. He had a dry sense of humor that took a while to catch. He noticed a Nevada plate because it struck him as odd, and he mentioned it to me on the radio one afternoon like it was a small piece of trivia, not like it was something that mattered. I don't know what happened to him. I have a feeling I will never know. People ask me sometimes why I stayed on the tower as long as I did after that first night with the truck at the stairs. The honest answer is that I didn't believe, at first, that they would come back. I thought parking outside my door in the dark was a warning. I thought it meant they knew I was watching and that they would stop using the road, and that would be the end of it. But I have learned some things since then, from reading about these cases and from the little bit Pete shared with me. Operations like the one running through that valley don't shut down for a single witness at a lookout tower. A fire lookout is a small variable. They didn't know exactly what I had seen, what I had reported, whether anyone was listening, so they came to look. They parked at the bottom of my stairs and sat there for 4 minutes and decided something. Then they came back twice more before the investigation caught up with them. I was lucky. I know that clearly. I sit with that knowledge every day. The Bitterroot felt like the safest place in the world from up on that tower. Clear sky, clean air, that long quiet valley below with nothing in it but trees and the pale line of the dirt road. It felt like a place that was separate from everything ugly. That's why people love those places. That's why I loved it. That road was not separate from anything. It was a corridor. It had been identified, scouted, and used carefully and quietly by people who understood exactly how invisible a remote road can be. They understood that better than I did, better than Pete did, better than the Forest Service or the county sheriff had thought to. Nobody monitors the service roads. They're too far out, too numerous, too easy to ignore. That's not a failure of any particular person. It's just the reality of a national forest the size of a small state. And people who move other people against their will are very good at finding the spaces between things. I work at the sporting goods store in Bozeman now, and I like it well enough. The customers are mostly people getting ready to go out into the wilderness, hunters, hikers, fly fishermen, families planning their first camping trip. Sometimes I watch them loading up on gear, and I think about what they believe the forest is. Safe, natural, untouched, a break from everything. I don't tell them what I know. It's not my place to say it, and it wouldn't change the forest for them anyway. The forest is still all those things it appears to be. I'm not saying it isn't. I'm only saying that there are roads that run through it that nobody watches, and that some people knew that long before I figured it out from the top of my tower. Those 4 minutes stay with me. The engine running in the dark, the exhaust rising in the cold air, the clearing empty on all sides and nobody getting out of the truck, just sitting there, making a decision. I still don't know what they decided about me. I'm glad I don't know. I think that's the honest thing to say. I am genuinely glad I never found out. There's a section of North Dakota I haven't been back to in almost 7 years. I go out of my way to avoid it, even if it adds 2 hours to the drive. People who know me think that's strange. My wife has asked me more than once to talk to somebody about it. Maybe she's right. But she wasn't standing at the edge of that sinkhole with me when the sun was going down. She didn't see what was at the bottom, and she didn't see Dr. Parr's face when the core sample came up. I don't know what's buried out there. I still don't. And the fact that I'm okay with not knowing, that's the part that should probably scare you most. I spent 6 years as a ranger at Theodore Roosevelt National Park in North Dakota. If you've never been, it's not what most people picture when they think of a national park. No waterfalls. No giant cliffs you can photograph from a paved overlook. It's badlands, dry, cracked earth in reds and yellows and tans. Buttes that rise up out of the flat ground like broken teeth. Cottonwood trees down along the river bottoms. Sky that goes on so far, you stop trying to find the edge of it. Before rangering, I spent 8 years in the National Guard. I liked structure. I liked tasks with clear answers. Rangering suited that. You had your patrol routes, your maintenance schedules, your seasonal responsibilities. Late September was always one of my favorite times to be out there. The summer crowds were gone. The days were cool, maybe 50 degrees, but the wind picks up in fall out on the plains, and it comes at you sideways, dry and steady. The park has 2 sections, the North Unit and the South Unit, separated by about 70 miles of open prairie. I worked mostly the South Unit. That's where the main trails are, the bison herd, the painted canyon overlook. But what matters to this story is a remote part of the South Unit that doesn't show up on visitor maps. No trails. No overlooks. No reason for a regular person to ever go there. Just raw, eroded land that drops off in ledges and shallow canyons. The kind of place where you could turn your ankle on a rock at the wrong step and nobody would hear you yell. The ground out there is always changing. Erosion doesn't stop. Every rain cuts a little deeper. Every freeze and thaw cracks the rock a little more. The buttes that people photograph today look different 30 years ago, and they'll look different 30 years from now. Things work their way out of the ground on their own out there: fossils, bone fragments, petrified wood, stuff that's been buried for millions of years just slowly rising to the surface. That's part of why scientists love the Badlands. So when a geological research team showed up with a permit to drill core samples in a remote section of the South Unit, it didn't raise any flags. We'd had research teams before. It was normal park business. Dr. Liz Parr was the lead on the project. She came from the University of North Dakota, mid-40s, short dark hair, always had her hands in her jacket pockets or wrapped around a thermos. The kind of person who doesn't waste words. She had a permit to study soil layers related to ancient volcanic activity in the region. The Badlands are full of bentonite clay that's basically compressed volcanic ash. Scientists study that kind of thing. Nothing unusual about it. Her graduate student was Craig Folsom, 26, thin, always carrying a notebook. He was the kind of person who fills silence with talking, not because he's nervous exactly, but because silence makes him uncomfortable. He'd never been to the Badlands before, and he kept saying it. "I've seen pictures, but I didn't think it would feel like this." He kept looking at the landscape like he was trying to understand something that didn't quite fit together. They had a drilling technician whose name I never caught clearly. I'll call him Danny because that might have been it. He ran the compact trailer-mounted rig they'd brought out. My job was straightforward. Escort the team, handle logistics, keep them in their permitted area, make sure nobody got hurt. Radio check-ins twice a day. Standard assignment. We set up a base camp near the drill area, a flat section of eroded terrain at the edge of a shallow canyon. No cell service. Nearest paved road was 6 miles out. Nearest town was Medora, the little tourist spot just outside the park entrance. I had my truck and my tent a little ways off from the research team's setup, and the days had that particular quiet you only get when you're far enough from everything that even the wind sounds like nothing. The drilling started on day 2. Danny set up the rig over the first marked location, and they went down about 60 feet. Core samples come up in sections, cylinders of packed earth and rock that you lay out end to end to see what's underground in sequence, layer by layer. Dr. Parr and Craig spread them out on a plastic-covered folding table and went through them carefully. Craig called out each layer. Clay, bentonite, sandstone, more ash, deeper sandstone. Dr. Parr photographed each section. Organized, methodical, nothing I needed to be involved in. First sample came up exactly as expected. Textbook Badlands geology. They moved the rig about 200 feet south for the second sample. That one also came up normal, mostly clay and ash and stone. But Craig stopped talking for a moment. He leaned close to the core, laid out on the table, and said, "You smell that?" I walked over. There was a smell, faint, like meat that was starting to turn. I looked around, figured there was probably a dead prairie dog somewhere nearby. That's a normal thing in the field. You smell something, you assume an animal, and you're usually right. Dr. Parr looked up from what she was doing and sniffed the air. She didn't say anything. I went back to my truck and didn't think much more about it. The third drilling location was about 30 feet from the second. They went deeper, this time closer to 80 feet. I was sitting in my truck eating lunch when Craig jogged over and knocked on my window. "Can you come look at something?" I followed him to the sample table. Dr. Parr was standing very still, arms crossed, staring at one of the middle sections of the core. She didn't look up when I walked over. The top sections looked the same as always: clay, ash, sandstone, normal. But at about the 4th or 5th section down, the material changed. It was dark, almost black, and it was not rock. You could see that immediately without touching it. Rock doesn't have that kind of texture. This was soft-looking. There were fibers visible in it, like something that had been packed down under pressure for a very long time. The color was uneven, darker in some spots, lighter in others. Wet-looking, but dry to the touch when Craig prodded it with a pencil. "That's at about 40 feet down," Craig said. I asked what it was. Dr. Parr said, "I'm not sure yet. Very flat, very careful." She spent the next several hours running field tests. I did my regular afternoon patrol, logged my radio check-ins, ate dinner. Around 8 o'clock, she came and found me at my truck. She sat on the tailgate without being invited, which she'd never done before. She sat there quietly for a moment. "It's organic," she said. "Not fossilized. It's preserved, but it's not petrified." The fibers still have structure, like something you'd find in a peat bog. A peat bog is a wet, boggy area where organic material gets buried and preserved by the water and the low oxygen environment. It can keep things, plants, animals, even people in remarkably good condition for thousands of years. But this isn't bog country, I said. This is dry badlands. I know. So how is it preserved out here? That's what I need to figure out. She looked out at the dark. I want to drill more samples. Same area, same depth. I need to know how far this material extends. I didn't have a reason to say no. They had a permit, the science seemed real, and it wasn't my place to shut down a legitimate research project because of a strange smell and some dark material in a core sample. So I said fine. They drilled 4 more samples over the next 2 days. Same area, same depth range. Every single one of them came up with the dark organic material, starting at about 40 feet and continuing down as far as the core went. Dr. Parr mapped each location on graph paper. When she connected them, the material spread across an area roughly the size of a football field, maybe bigger, all at the same depth. The exact same dark, fibrous, preserved matter. Nobody said the obvious thing out loud. But the obvious thing was sitting right there. What is something this big doing 40 feet underground in the middle of the North Dakota Badlands? Craig stopped making his little jokes. He got quiet in a way that was different from his usual energy. I noticed he kept looking at the ground a lot, not at the landscape, but at the dirt directly under his feet. Like he was thinking about what was below it. On the 3rd night, he told me the ground was vibrating. He said it woke him up around 2 in the morning. Not a noise, he said. More of a feeling. A low, slow pulse, like what you'd get if a very heavy truck passed by a long way off. I told him it was wind. The wind does strange things out there at night. It can make a tent wall vibrate in a way that feels like it's coming from below. He nodded, but didn't look like he believed me. That night, after my light was off, I paid attention. And there was something, very faint, not a sound, more of a deep, slow rhythm in the ground beneath my sleeping bag. I told myself it was my imagination, and I went to sleep. I've thought about that decision a lot since. On the morning of the 5th day, Danny found me before breakfast. There's a hole, he said. About 50 yards from the main drill site, a sinkhole had opened up overnight, roughly round, about 3 feet across. I shone my flashlight down into it. The walls were smooth, not crumbly and jagged the way a normal ground collapse looks. These edges were almost shaped, pressed outward. I called it in to the district office. Reported it as a safety concern. The dispatcher said someone would note it. Dr. Parr walked over and looked at the hole. She crouched down and touched the wall of it. The soil around the edge is compressed outward, she said, not collapsed inward. A sinkhole happens when a void underneath causes the surface to drop into it. The edges fall in. But she was saying these edges were pushed the other direction out, like something below had pressed upward. Nobody had an explanation. There's a rancher named Bev Tully whose property runs right along the southern boundary of the park. Her family has been on that land for over 100 years. I'd met her a few times before over normal park boundary business grazing issues, fence line stuff. She was in her 60s, weathered in the way that people who work outside their whole lives get weathered. She had the kind of face that doesn't give much away. I drove out to her place to ask whether she'd noticed any unusual ground settling near the boundary. Routine visit. When there's a sinkhole, you check with the neighbors to see if it's part of a larger pattern. Bev was in her barn when I pulled up. I told her about the sinkhole and gave her a rough description of where we were working, the section of badlands with no trails, east of the canyon road. She went still. She set down what she was holding. Where exactly? She asked. I was more specific. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't read at first. Not quite fear. More like someone who just heard a piece of news they'd been half expecting for a long time and still aren't happy to hear it. My grandfather told my father something, she said, and my father passed it to me. He said the Lakota people who lived on this land before white settlement had a name for that section of badlands. He never knew the exact word, but what it meant in English was something close to the ground that is resting. She walked to the barn door and leaned against the frame, looking out at the land. The elders told my grandfather never to dig in that section. He asked them why, expecting them to say it was sacred ground, burial ground, something like that. But they didn't say that. They said it wasn't about spirits. They said the ground there was resting, and they said if you wake it up, it remembers. I stood there and didn't say anything. My grandfather took it seriously, she said. He was not a superstitious man. He kept his cattle out of that section his whole life. My father did the same. I've never once dug anything there. Not a fence post, not a water line, nothing. I thanked her and drove back to camp. I want to tell you I dismissed what she said. I want to say it was interesting folklore and nothing more. But it stayed with me the entire drive back. The ground that is resting, and what she'd said after that, if you wake it up, it remembers. When I got back to camp, there was a second sinkhole. This one was about 6 feet across. It had opened about 20 feet from the drill rig, which nobody had been near since that morning. I went to the edge, maybe 12 or 14 feet deep. Same smooth, compressed walls, pushed outward. At the bottom, in the last of the afternoon light, I saw something that stopped me. I've tried to describe this probably 1,000 times, and I've never found the right words for it. At the bottom of the hole, beneath a thin layer of displaced soil, there was a surface. It curved, gently, like you were looking at the very top of something large and round. The color was very dark, almost black, not rock. I've worked around enough rock in 6 years to know what rock looks like. This was something different. The surface was even and smooth in a way that rock isn't. No grain, no fracture lines, no variation, just smooth and dark and slightly curved. I picked up a small stone from nearby and dropped it down into the hole. It hit the surface and bounced back. Not rolled, not settled, bounced. The way a ball bounces off a floor that has some give to it. Like whatever was underneath the surface absorbed just a little of the impact and then returned to its original position. I stood there for a while before I said anything to anyone. When I told Dr. Parr about the surface at the bottom of the sinkhole, she went to see it herself. She was at the edge with a flashlight for about 5 minutes, not saying anything. When she came back, her face was completely unreadable. "I want to request a ground-penetrating radar scan," she said. "I think there's a mass underground." Craig was nearby. He repeated the word. A mass. Something solid, large, down there. Craig looked at the ground. Then he looked at me. "I want to officially say I think we should leave." Dr. Parr didn't respond to him. I radioed the district office and formally requested a USGS geologist to come out and evaluate the sinkholes as a safety hazard. Standard procedure when you have 2 collapses near an active drill site. A man from the USGS named Patterson arrived 2 days later. He walked the sinkhole sites, took measurements, took photos. He went to the edge of the second one and looked down for a long time. "Subsurface void collapse," he said. He meant the drilling had disturbed an empty space underground, and the surface had dropped into it. Dr. Parr asked him, "Does void collapse typically result in perimeter soil being pushed outward rather than collapsing inward?" He paused. "Not typically, no." She nodded like she'd already expected that answer. Patterson recommended stopping all drilling in that specific area as a safety measure. Dr. Parr agreed, but she moved ahead with her request for ground-penetrating radar equipment. The radar team arrived 3 days later. They dragged their equipment across the site in a grid pattern, the data building up on a laptop screen as a sideways image of everything underground, different layers showing up as different shades, denser material coming up darker. I watched over the technician's shoulder. You could see the clay layer, the ash layer below it, normal geology doing what normal geology does. And then, at about 50 feet below the surface, there was something that wasn't a layer. It was a mass, solid, regular in shape. The technician kept running passes to define its edges. It spread across the entire drill area, the same football field-sized footprint, where all the organic material had shown up in the cores, and it was roughly cylindrical in shape. But the technician said the radar signal was behaving strangely. It wasn't bouncing off a clear surface the way it should. "The signal is being absorbed," he said, "and then it's returned slowly. I've never seen that. It's like it's going into something and having to come back out." Patterson said nothing. Dr. Parr studied the screen for a long time without speaking. She asked how large. The technician measured on screen. At minimum 40 meters in the longest dimension. That's about 130 feet. That night, around 11, I woke up to a sound. Deep and cracking, like ice breaking on a lake, but lower in pitch and slower. Then a long screech of metal. I got out of my tent and ran toward the sound. The second sinkhole had expanded. 6 feet across had become 25 feet across, and the drill rig that Danny had parked near the site had gone into it. The front end was down in the hole at a sharp angle. The trailer hitch snapped. It wasn't coming out without a heavy crane. All four of us stood at the edge with flashlights, looking down. The bottom of the hole was now maybe 20 feet down, and the curved surface was exposed across the entire floor of the sinkhole, not just a small patch. It went from one side to the other. All that dark, smooth, slightly curved surface. And I could see now, clearly in the flashlight beams, that the surface was responding to the weight of the drill rig resting on it. Very slowly, the sections of the rig's metal frame were pressing into the surface barely, maybe a fraction of an inch, and then, just as slowly, the surface was pushing back, not collapsing, not cracking, just absorbing the weight and returning, like watching something breathe. Very, very slowly. Craig said, "I'm packing up." He walked back to his tent, and nobody stopped him. Dr. Parr tied a rope around her waist, anchored the other end to a truck bumper, and lowered herself down into the hole. She stopped about 15 feet down, hanging above the surface, and used a scraper tool to collect a sample from the exposed area. She came back up. She didn't show us what was in the container. She sealed it immediately and put it straight into her pack. I asked her what she saw up close. She was quiet for a moment. She said, "I think the ground is resting for a reason." Then she walked back to her tent, and that was the last real conversation I had with her on that site. I called the district office the next morning and reported a drill rig in a sinkhole, expanding ground collapse, and a research team requesting early departure. They told me to close the area and document everything with photos and incident reports. I filed 3 incident reports over the next 2 days. I was thorough. That was my training. Dr. Parr and Craig and Danny loaded up and left on a Tuesday morning. Dr. Parr shook my hand before getting in the truck. She had circles under her eyes. She looked at me and said, "Don't go back to that site alone." Then she got in, and they drove off. Craig waved from the passenger window as they went. He looked relieved. He also looked scared in a way I recognized, not the kind of scared that comes from not knowing what's happening, but the kind that comes from understanding something and wishing you didn't. I put up the closure signs, marked the exclusion zone in the system, and turned in my incident reports. 2 weeks later, a federal research team arrived. 3 government SUVs, and 2 vehicles behind them that I recognized as Army Corps of Engineers equipment. My supervisor reassigned me to visitor center duty and said the project was under a federal permit classification that restricted field staff from involvement. I asked what they were doing out there. He said he wasn't sure. I tried to go back to the site once to check on it. A man in an unmarked jacket stopped me at the boundary, not rude about it, just firm. He showed me a federal ID and said the area was temporarily restricted. He said the word temporarily with the kind of tone that doesn't actually mean temporary. I finished my season at Theodore Roosevelt in November and transferred to Glacier National Park in Montana. New mountains, different terrain. I'd been thinking about a transfer for a while, and after that fall, the decision felt easy. Before I left, I asked around quietly about what had happened at the site. None of the other rangers knew anything. The official log just listed the area as under federal review, surface instability. 7 words. That was it. About 6 months after getting to Glacier, I started looking for Dr. Parr's research. The University of North Dakota Geology Department had her listed as faculty. Her most recent published paper was from the year before our project. Nothing from the following year. Nothing about Badlands soil. Nothing about the South Unit. Nothing. I sent an email to the department asking about any publications related to Theodore Roosevelt National Park. A department assistant wrote back and said, "Dr. Parr was currently on sabbatical, and they couldn't provide a forwarding contact." I looked up Craig Folsom's social media. He had a few accounts. The last post on each one was from around the time they left the site. A few landscape photos from North Dakota. No captions. Then nothing. No goodbye post, no account deletion. Just silence. I reached out to a few geology contacts I'd made over the years. Nobody had seen Dr. Parr at any conferences recently. One professor told me her disappearance from the field had been noticed by people in the department. He used the word disappearance like it was a straightforward academic observation. I sat with that word for a while. 3 years after leaving Theodore Roosevelt, I was using a satellite mapping application on my laptop for something unrelated. And on an impulse, I looked up the coordinates of the drill site. The terrain had changed. The section where we drilled the Badlands with its eroded buttes and layered canyons had sunk, not by a foot or two, by about 4 feet across the whole area. You could see the difference clearly compared to the surrounding ground. A broad, shallow bowl in the landscape where before it had been flat. If you didn't know what you were looking at, you'd think it was just a depression. Normal erosion. The Park Service listed it as a natural erosion event in a report I found later. Subsidence consistent with known geological processes in the region. Nobody who hadn't been there would have any reason to question it. About a year after I found the satellite image, my phone rang late on a Thursday night. Unknown number, North Dakota area code. It was Bev Tully. She didn't say hello, she just started talking. They came back, she said. Not the scientists. Different people. They came with big trucks and equipment, and they worked out there for about 3 weeks. My hired hand saw them from the ridge. I asked what they were doing. Pouring concrete, an entire section, multiple truckloads. They had a big mixing unit and everything. I thought about the curved surface at the bottom of that sinkhole, about the slow way it breathed. They told the county it was road maintenance, Bev said. Her voice was flat and even, the voice of someone who's kept it together for a very long time. They filed paperwork with the county road office, road maintenance. I said, "There's no road out there." "No," she said, "there's not." Silence. Then she said, "Mike, my grandfather kept his cattle away from that section for his whole life. My father did the same. I've done the same. We never asked that land to be anything it wasn't. We just left it alone." Her voice dropped just slightly. "I don't know what those people did. I don't know if it was the drilling or the concrete or what. But I drive past that boundary sometimes and look out there, and it feels different now. It doesn't feel like it's resting anymore." I asked her what it felt like now. She was quiet for a moment. "It feels like something that's been awake for a while," she said. "Just waiting to see what happens next." She said goodnight and hung up. I don't know what's under that ground. I've thought about it for years, and I've never landed on an answer that fits all the pieces. I know what it wasn't. It wasn't rock. It wasn't fossil. It wasn't any kind of natural formation I've ever read about. I know the radar showed something roughly cylindrical, about 130 feet long, 50 feet underground, absorbing signals instead of bouncing them back. I know the sinkholes pushed outward at their edges rather than collapsing inward. I know the surface at the bottom had give to it like it was alive and breathing, just very slowly. I know that the Lakota, who lived on that land for generations before anyone else knew something about it, they knew it well enough that the warning survived for over 100 years, crossed cultural lines, landed in a ranching family's memory, and stayed there. The ground that is resting, that phrase is accurate. That is exactly what it looked like, something enormous, underground, that was not dead and not fossilized and not stone. Something that was preserved and still, and very, very quiet, resting. I know that when people started disturbing it, the ground around it changed. The sinkholes, the pulse I felt in the ground at night. The animals that had quietly moved out of that section of Badlands before we ever arrived. Bev told me that later, that she hadn't seen deer or pronghorn near that boundary for months before the drilling started. Like they already knew. I know that concrete was poured over it. I know that Dr. Parr's research was never published, and that she walked away from her academic career after leaving that site. I know Craig Folsom's social media stopped the day they drove away. I know a federal team with military-looking equipment came in, worked for 2 weeks, and left without filing a single public document I could ever find. What I don't know, what I think about more than anything, is whether all that concrete was poured to keep something out, or to keep something in. I don't go back to that part of North Dakota. I've made my peace with that. Some things, the more you dig into them, the worse they get. And some ground is better left the way it was found, resting. The thing that still gets me even now, years after I left NPS, isn't what happened on the roof that night. It isn't the footprints I found in the wet sand outside my door, barefoot and human, pressed so deep they had to belong to someone carrying a lot of weight. It's what I found buried in the sand at the back of a sea cave on the north shore of San Miguel Island. A plastic bag, wrapped tight, and inside ranger patches, NPS patches from parks all over the country, different designs, different years. The oldest one I could make out was from 1974. Someone had been collecting them for a long time. I'm going to tell you what happened during my 3 months on San Miguel. Some of what I experienced had a normal explanation. Some of it probably does, and I just never found out what it was. But there's a part of this, the part that connects everything, that I still can't explain. And I've tried. I was 32 when I got assigned to San Miguel Island. I'd just finished a seasonal position at Joshua Tree, and I was looking for something different. I wanted somewhere quiet, somewhere remote. A lot of rangers talk about wanting that, but most of them don't mean it. They want the idea of remote. They don't want to actually be alone. I meant it. San Miguel Island is the westernmost island in the Channel Islands chain, about 30 miles off the coast of Santa Barbara, California. It's the least visited island in the park by a wide margin. Access is by boat only, and the weather out there is unpredictable enough that the boat doesn't always make it. No cell service, no public facilities, no other people, most of the time. The island itself is about 9 miles long and 4 miles wide. It looks different from what you'd expect from a California island. There are no palm trees, no pretty beaches with clear water. It's mostly rolling grasslands and sand dunes, shaped by wind that blows almost constantly from the west. The weather changes fast. Fog comes in off the Pacific in the afternoon and sometimes doesn't lift for days. The thing that struck me most when I first read about the island, and the thing I'd think about a lot later, was the caliche ghost forest. Caliche is a mineral. When old trees die and get buried in the sand, the caliche in the soil sometimes forms a cast around the roots and the trunk. Over thousands of years, the wood rots away, but the mineral cast stays. What you're left with is the shape of a tree, a hollow white shell standing in the sand where the actual tree used to be. San Miguel has hundreds of these. Some of them are 6 or 7 feet tall. They stand in clusters in the sandy clearings, pale white, with no leaves, no branches, just the basic shape of something that was once alive. At dusk, when the sun is low and the shadows are long, they look like people standing in a field. I thought that was interesting when I read about it. I thought it was a lot of other things once I was actually there. I arrived on a Tuesday in early March. Captain Ray Choi brought me out on the park's supply vessel, the Sunfish, a steel-hulled workboat that the Channel Islands headquarters uses for resupply runs to all the islands. Captain Choi had been running supplies to the Channel Islands for almost 15 years at that point. Korean-American guy, early 60s, built like someone who spent his whole life on boats. Not much of a talker, but he answered questions straight. It was a 3-hour ride from the mainland. The water got rough about an hour out, and I spent most of the trip below deck holding onto a railing and trying not to think about how far from shore we were. When we came around the west end of the island, and I got my first look at San Miguel, the weather was doing something I'd come to recognize as typical low fog, sitting right on top of the island like a lid, wind coming hard off the water, and a sky that couldn't decide if it was going to rain or not. Choi helped me carry my gear up from the small landing area to the ranger station, which sat on a low rise, maybe 200 yards from the dock. He didn't say much during the walk. The wind made conversation difficult anyway. When we got everything inside, he looked around the station for a moment, then looked at me. "You know what you signed up for?" he said. "Remote assignment, 3 months, solar rotation." He nodded like that was the right answer, but not the whole answer. "Island's quiet," he said, "but it listens." I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. He told me he'd be back in 2 weeks with the next supply run, said I had the radio frequency for the mainland office and for his boat, and then he left. I watched the Sunfish head back east until the fog swallowed it. Then I went inside and started getting set up. The ranger station was small. One main room with a cot against one wall, a desk, a 2-way radio, a propane stove, and a shelf full of reference materials, field guides, topographic maps, protocol manuals. A small bathroom, a storage area off the back with equipment, binoculars, measuring tools, sample collection kits, a first aid kit, rain gear. The previous ranger, Dennis Voss, had done a 3-month rotation that ended about 6 weeks before I arrived. According to the paperwork, he'd left early due to a medical issue. His personal belongings were supposed to have been picked up, but there was a cardboard box shoved under the cot that nobody had gotten around to shipping out. I didn't go through it right away. I spent my first week getting into the routine. Ranger duties on San Miguel aren't complicated, but they're consistent. Every morning, I do a weather check and radio in my daily status report to Helen Pasco at the mainland office. Helen was the chief ranger at Channel Islands headquarters, late 40s. Always sounded a little exhausted on the radio, like she was managing too many things at once. Then I'd head out for the day's patrol. The island has a few maintained trails, but most of the monitoring work involves walking areas that aren't on any trail. The west end of the island has the largest northern elephant seal colony in the world. During pupping season, thousands of seals. My job was to monitor their numbers, check for sick or injured animals, and make sure no visitors who'd made it out on a private boat were getting too close. The North Shore was the most rugged part of the island. Sea caves cut into the sandstone bluffs, some of them accessible at low tide, some of them only reachable by climbing. I was supposed to check them periodically for erosion damage and make sure no unauthorized camping was happening. I did my work. I kept my logs. I called in my reports. The first week passed quietly. The second week, I was looking for a spare flashlight battery, and I opened Dennis Voss's box. It wasn't like I went digging through his things. The batteries were in a bag near the top. I moved a few items around to reach them, and that's when I saw the journal. Leather-bound, kind of worn. His name was written in ballpoint pen on the inside front cover. I should have set it aside. I know that. But I read the first page, and then the second, and I couldn't stop. It started the way you'd expect. Weather observations, wildlife counts, practical stuff. The writing was neat and steady. The entries were short and factual. About a month in, the tone started to change slightly. Not dramatically, you wouldn't even notice it at first. He just started paying more attention to small things. A gull that kept landing in the same spot near the station. A smell near the North Shore cliffs that he couldn't identify. Small things. Then I got to an entry about 6 weeks into his rotation. Went into Cave 6 for erosion check. Found cold fire pit near the back. Recent. Ashes still warm when I touched them. No sign of a person. Whoever built it left before I got there or while I was moving around inside. I sat down on the cot and kept reading. The next dozen entries were mostly normal. Wildlife counts, weather, radio reports. But every few days there was a note about the caves. Dennis had gone back to Cave 6. The fire pit was gone, cleaned up, or scattered. But Cave 9, which he checked next, had a bedroll pushed into a corner. Old sleeping bag, tied with a piece of rope. He radioed Helen at the mainland office. Her response, according to his notes, was that it was almost certainly an illegal camper, probably a kayaker who'd paddled out from the mainland on a good weather day. She told him to post a notice and check the caves more frequently. He kept checking. Cave 9 was empty 2 days later, but Cave 12 had fresh signs, fish bones near the entrance, a water bottle, what looked like a cooking grate balanced on 2 rocks. Whoever it was, they were moving. Each time Dennis checked one cave and found something, they'd already shifted to a different one. He described it in the journal as feeling like he was being led around the island. He reported all of this to Helen. Her response each time was essentially the same, probably an illegal camper. Keep documenting, we'll sort it out at the next supply run. I closed the journal and looked at the North Shore trail map on the wall. I counted the cave markings on the map. There were 16. I went out to the caves the next morning. I started at Cave 1 and worked east toward Cave 6. They were accessible at low tide, cut into the sandstone base of the bluffs. Dark inside, cold, smelling of salt and wet rock. My flashlight showed clean walls, clean floors, nothing but old tideline marks and the occasional mound of dried kelp. I didn't find anything that day. I went back to the station, updated my log, called in my report. Helen asked how the seal count was going. I said fine. I didn't mention the journal. I'm not sure why, probably because I didn't want to bring up something that had already been reported and dismissed. The second day out, I found the footprints. They were in a sandy clearing just south of the Kalachi Ghost Forest, about halfway between the North Shore Trail and the station. Barefoot. Human. 5 toes, a clear arch, a heel, no question about what they were. They came from the direction of the forest and headed toward the station. The prints were fresh, made after the dew had settled, but before the morning wind had started to work on them. I stopped and looked at them for a long time. Seal tracks looked nothing like human footprints. I knew that. I'd spent enough time on the coast that this was not a question in my mind. These were made by a person walking on bare feet. Someone heavy, or carrying something, because the prints were pressed deep into the sand. I followed them. They went to within about 30 feet of the station and then veered right, toward the south slope of the rise, and disappeared into a rocky area where the ground was too hard to hold prints. I did a full loop around the station. Nothing else. I went inside and stood at my desk for a while, thinking. Then I got on the radio and called Helen. Helen, This is Pelayo on San Miguel. I've got a question. Those footprint reports from Voss, the bare footprints near the ghost forest. A pause. That was in his file, yeah. We concluded it was probably seal or sea lion activity distorting the sand patterns. I know what seal tracks look like, I said. I found prints this morning. Human, barefoot, leading from the Caliche area toward the station. Another pause, longer this time. Could be a visitor who beached a small craft and didn't register. I'd have heard a boat. The weather's been calm. Kayaker, she said. Wind can cover the sound. Post a notice at the landing area and keep documenting. I'll note it in your file. I said okay and signed off. I sat there for a minute looking at the radio. She wasn't dismissing it the way you dismiss something you think is nothing. She was dismissing it the way you dismiss something you don't want to deal with right now. There's a difference. I know what both sound like. The next supply run came on a Thursday. Captain Choi tied up at the dock and started unloading crates while I helped carry them up to the station. We worked in silence for a few trips. Then I just came out with it. What can you tell me about Dennis Voss? Choi set down a crate and straightened up slowly. He looked out at the water for a moment. Good ranger, he said. Serious about the job. 20+ years. Not the kind of person who makes things up. I found his journal, I said. He reported seeing signs of someone living in the caves. Choi nodded once, slowly. Like he already knew what I was going to say. What happened when you picked him up? I asked. At the end of his rotation? He looked at me then. Not suspicious, more like he was deciding something. He was sitting on the dock when I got here, Choi said. Supposed to be waiting with his gear packed, ready to load. He was sitting on the dock with nothing. No bag, no equipment, no shoes. Soaking wet, like he'd been in the water, just staring at the channel. Did he say what happened? Couldn't get more than a few words out of him. He kept looking back at the island. I had to get him below deck just to get him to stop. Choi paused. One thing he said. I asked him if he was okay, and he said, don't let them send anyone else there. I felt something cold that wasn't the wind. He never came back to work? I asked. Medical leave. Then he resigned. Choi picked up the crate again. Laura, you see anything strange out here? You call me directly. Don't wait for Helen to process it through the office. You call me, and I'll get you off this island. He said it plain, not dramatic, just a fact. Okay, I said. He nodded and carried the crate up to the station. That night, I finished reading the journal. The second half was different from the first. The handwriting changed, still readable, but tighter, like he was pressing harder with the pen. Some entries were very short. Others went on for pages. He started writing about sounds at night, coming from the North Shore, the direction of the caves. He described it as singing, though he kept putting that word in quotes, like he wasn't sure that was the right one. He said it wasn't English. He didn't recognize the language. It wasn't loud, he'd only heard it on still nights when the wind wasn't blowing. And even then, he could only just make it out from inside the station with the window cracked. He went to investigate twice. Both times, the sound stopped before he reached the cave area. The third time, he found Cave 15. Cave 15 was on his map, but he noted that he'd never actually gone inside. It was marked as requiring climbing gear to access, and he hadn't prioritized it. But the sound seemed to be coming from that direction, and when he hiked to the base of the bluff, he found that the entrance was blocked. Not collapsed. Blocked. Someone had stacked flat sandstone rocks across the opening, not carelessly, deliberately, fitted together like rough brickwork. He wrote, stacked from the inside. I could see the edges of the rocks from outside, but the arrangement, the way they fit together, you couldn't have done that from outside. Whoever sealed this cave was inside when they did it. His last entry was dated the morning of his pickup day. He wrote that he was going to go back to Cave 15 before Choi arrived. He wanted to move enough of the rocks to see inside. The entry ends mid-sentence. He wrote, if I'm not back by the time Ray. And then it just stopped. I put the journal down. The station was quiet. The wind had died down after sunset, which was unusual. There's almost always some wind on San Miguel. I sat at the desk listening to the nothing for a while. That's a specific kind of sound when you're used to wind. When it stops, the silence feels like something filling the space instead. I thought about what he'd written. Someone sealed inside a cave. Footprints appearing overnight. Sounds from the North Shore. The way Helen kept giving the same non-answer every time he reported something. I thought about what Choi had said. No shoes, soaking wet. Don't let them send anyone else there. I didn't sleep well that night. The next morning, I went to Cave 15. The hike to Cave 15 takes about an hour and a half from the station. You go north through the ghost forest, then down the bluff trail to the cave access area. The caliche formations were thick that morning, fog sitting between them, making the white shapes look even more like people standing around. I walked through without letting myself look too closely at them. That sounds irrational, I know that, but there's a difference between thinking something is a threat and just not wanting to look at it. I didn't want to look at them that morning. The North Shore cliffs are higher than you'd expect. The sandstone has been cut by the ocean into sharp shapes, horizontal lines of erosion, dark streaks from water and algae, shallow overhangs. Cave 15's entrance was at the base of a section of bluff where the rock jutted out, creating a natural shelter. The rock blocking was still there. Some of it had shifted, maybe erosion, maybe something else, and there was a gap near the bottom left corner about the width of my shoulders. I stood there for a few minutes looking at it. I checked the time. I had my radio clipped to my chest. I had my flashlight. The weather was clear, and I had 4 hours before the light started to go. I got down and squeezed through. Inside, the cave went back much further than I expected. The entrance opened up into a passage that curved slightly to the right, then widened into a main chamber about 30 feet across. The ceiling was maybe 8 feet high. My flashlight picked up clean rock walls, a sandy floor, and a smell salt water and something else underneath it. Something like damp cloth or old wood that's been wet too many times. The cave went back further. Another passage at the far end of the main chamber, going slightly downhill. I followed it. It opened into a second chamber, larger than the first. And here, up on a natural rock shelf, about 3 feet off the ground, above where the tide could reach, there was a living space. There's no other word for it. A living space. Woven grass mats on the shelf, old and stiff, but still in one piece. A flat rock that had clearly been used as a surface for preparing food. There were knife marks on it and old grease stains. A tin container that might have once held something. A pile of what had been cloth, now mostly rotted down to fibers, but with a few strips still holding their shape. And the walls of the second chamber were covered in marks. I got up close with my flashlight. Tally marks. Cut into the stone, rows of 4 with a 5th line crossing them diagonal. I started counting and stopped somewhere around 300. But they weren't all tally marks. Some were different. I couldn't identify most of them. A few looked like simple pictures, waves, maybe, or what might have been a bird shape. One mark repeated over and over that I couldn't figure out. I took photos with my satellite communicator's camera. Then I went deeper. There was one more space at the back, smaller, low-ceilinged. You had to duck to get in. In the center of the floor, the sand had been disturbed. Something had been buried and dug up and buried again. I could see the uneven surface clearly in my flashlight beam. I dug with my hands. About a foot down, I hit plastic. It was a large Ziploc bag, triple-folded and wrapped with what had once been duct tape. Inside the bag were patches. NPS patches, National Park Service patches, the kind rangers wear on their uniforms. I counted them later. There were 11. Different designs, the NPS Arrowhead logo changed over the decades, and I could see at least 4 different versions. Different parks, one from Sequoia, one from the Everglades, one from Olympic. The oldest-looking one had a faded logo I didn't immediately recognize. I found out later it was from a ranger station that closed in 1978. I sat back on my heels in that small room and looked at them spread out on the sand in front of me. I thought about Dennis Voss, about rotation schedules, about how many rangers had been through San Miguel over the years, about how many could have left something behind. I got out of the cave. I'm not proud of how fast I moved, but I moved fast. The hike back was different from the hike out. Every sound registered. The wind had picked up and the long grass was moving in it, which made the whole hillside look like it was shivering. I went through the ghost forest at almost a jog, not looking at the formations. Except I stopped once. I had to. About halfway through the caliche area, there was a cluster of formations I'd walked past a dozen times before. I knew their shapes when you walk the same ground every day. You start to know what things look like, where things are. The 2 that stood close together in a Y shape near the east path, the tall, narrow one that leaned slightly north, the short, wide one at the end. There were 2 shapes in that cluster, that I didn't recognize. The fog was heavy. I couldn't see clearly. But the shapes were wrong. They were in the right area, but they weren't the right height, and they weren't the right color. The caliche is a dull, chalky white. These two shapes were slightly different. A little darker, more upright, smoother. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds. The shapes didn't move. I kept walking. I didn't run, but I walked at a pace that was close to running, and I didn't stop until I was back at the station with the door closed behind me. I got on the radio immediately. "Helen, this is Pelayo on San Miguel. I need emergency extraction as soon as possible." A pause. "Laura, what's the situation?" "I found evidence of long-term unauthorized habitation in Cave 15 on the North Shore. Multiple NPS ranger patches from various parks and dates. I have photos. I'm requesting immediate extraction." Another pause longer. "Is there any immediate threat to your safety?" "I don't know." "Are you injured?" "No." "I understand your concern. Let me check the weather window." Static. Then, "Earliest we can get a boat to you is 3 days, Laura. There's a system moving through the channel. I'll notify the appropriate response teams and we'll escalate the protocol." 3 days. "I know that's not what you want to hear. Stay in the station after dark. Document everything you can. I'll have Troy on standby." I signed off and sat there, looking at the wall. 3 days. The first day was mostly fine. I stayed close to the station. I documented everything, the photos from the cave, sketches of the living space, my descriptions of the tally marks, the ranger patches laid out and photographed one by one. I wrote a detailed incident report. I kept the radio charged. I kept busy because keeping busy kept me from sitting still and thinking too hard. The second night, I heard something. I'd been in that half-sleep where you're still aware of sounds, still processing the wind, the distant seals, the normal noises of the island. When I heard it, some part of my brain had already registered it before I was fully awake. Footsteps on the roof. Slow, one at a time. Deliberate. Our roof was corrugated metal. It had a specific sound in the rain, and when gulls walked on it, I'd gotten used to both. This was different. This was heavier, human weight heavy. Step, 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 crossing from one end of the station to the other, maybe 30 feet. Then a pause. A long pause, long enough that I thought maybe it was done. Then step, step, step back. I lay in my cot without moving. I went through every rational explanation I could think of. A large bird. I couldn't think of a bird heavy enough. Not even a pelican gets close to that sound. A seal, somehow on top of the building? The roof is not reachable from the ground on any side. It's a raised structure on a concrete pad with eaves 6 feet up and no access from the slope on the east side. There's no way an animal was up there. The footsteps went back and forth for 2 hours. I know it was 2 hours because I watched the clock and I didn't move from my cot the entire time. Around 3 a.m., they stopped. I didn't sleep after that. When light came up, I waited a full hour before I went outside. Then I went around to the back of the station where the ground rises enough that someone could get to the roof. There were muddy footprints on the corrugated metal. Human footprints. Barefoot. They went back and forth across the roof exactly the way I'd heard from one end to the other, back and forth, back and forth. I stood there looking at them until I felt cold all the way through, and then I went back inside and called Choi directly. "You available?" I said when he picked up. "Checking weather now. I can be there tonight if the system clears faster than forecast. Might be rough going." "Come tonight," I said. "Come whenever you can." He said okay and hung up. I spent the rest of the day in the station with the door latched. I kept the radio volume up. I wrote in my log. I made myself eat something. In the early afternoon, I thought I heard the singing Dennis had described. A sound from the north, from the direction of the caves. Not music exactly, no melody I could pick out, but rhythmic. More like something repeating. It lasted about 3 minutes, and then the wind shifted, and it was gone. I wrote it down. Choi arrived at dusk. The boat came in rough, the weather wasn't fully clear, and I could hear the waves before I could see his running lights. I had everything packed and was waiting at the dock before he even tied up. He didn't say anything about the state I was in. He just helped me get my bags aboard and got the boat moving. When we cleared the western point of the island and San Miguel disappeared behind us into the fog, I let myself breathe all the way for the first time in 2 days. I filed a full written incident report when I got back to the mainland, 14 pages. Photos? The ranger patches in an evidence bag, location descriptions, the journal entries I'd transcribed word for word, my own observations, dates, times, everything. Helen Pascoe received it in person and thanked me. She said the appropriate agencies would be notified. Law enforcement, the Coast Guard, she used all the right words. She said they'd look into it thoroughly. She never once asked me what I thought was actually happening out there. I was on medical leave for a month. Not because anything physical happened to me, I was fine physically, but I wasn't sleeping right, and the park doctor wanted me evaluated. I saw a counselor for a while. Eventually I went back to work at a different park. I'm still a ranger. I never went back to Channel Islands. 6 months after I left San Miguel, I checked the NPS job posting board. San Miguel Island was listed. 3-month rotation. Open position. No mention of any investigation. No mention of anything unusual. I called Choi. He answered on the second ring. I told him I was looking at the posting and asked what he knew about it. They always list it, he said. Choi, was there an investigation? Did anyone go back to that cave? A long silence. I picked up the ranger before you, he said. A guy named Fontaine. He lasted 5 weeks. Left in the middle of his rotation. Said he had a family emergency. I never believed it. A pause. And the one before him lasted about the same. How many? I said. How many rangers have they sent to that island? I could hear him breathing. In the 11 years I've been running supplies to San Miguel, he said. You were the 9th ranger assigned to that island. I sat with that for a moment. And the patches, I said. I gave them to Helen. What happened with them? I don't have access to that kind of documentation, he said. Do you think NPS is just going to keep sending people there? Laura. He sounded tired. I think they already sent a 10th. Neither of us said anything for a moment. You want my advice? He said. Yeah. Don't check the posting board anymore. I've thought about this a lot in the years since. Who was living in those caves? How long they'd been there? What they wanted from the rangers, or what they took from them. The patches. That's what I keep coming back to. There were 11 patches in that bag. The oldest one dated to around 1974. 11 rangers over maybe 50 years. But Choi said 9 rangers in 11 years. Those numbers don't add up the way you'd expect. Either patches came from somewhere else, or this has been going on much longer than just San Miguel Island. Or both. I looked up the parks on the patches I could identify. Olympic National Park, the Everglades, Sequoia. Parks in different corners of the country, nothing connecting them geographically. Islands aren't the only remote assignments in the NPS. There are a lot of places you can send a lone ranger and have them completely cut off from help. I don't know if whoever was in those caves had anything to do with what happened to those rangers. I don't know if anything happened to those rangers at all. Maybe they just left patches behind accidentally. Maybe everything I experienced has an explanation I haven't thought of. But Dennis Voss walked into those caves and came out soaking wet with no shoes and couldn't speak. And he said, "Don't let them send anyone else there." And they sent 8 more people after him. The Caliche Ghost Forest at San Miguel Island looks like people standing in a field at dusk. The fog comes in off the Pacific and fills the spaces between those white mineral shapes, and in low light, from a distance, it really is hard to tell what's a formation and what isn't. I know the difference now, or I think I do. I think about those 2 shapes I saw in the ghost forest the afternoon I found the cave. The ones that were the wrong color, the ones I walked past and chose not to look at directly. They didn't move, I'm sure of that. But here's what I can't stop thinking about. I retraced my route exactly. I know I walked through the same part of that forest on the way in and the way out. And I've been trying for years to remember, were those 2 shapes in the same spot on the way back as they were on the way in? I can't say for certain that they were. I still have a photo of Dennis Voss's last journal entry on my phone, the one with the unfinished sentence. I don't look at it often. But I think about what he started to write. If I'm not back by the time Ray, he was making a plan. He knew going into Cave 15 that he might not come back out. And whatever he found in there, he did come out. He made it to the dock. He was sitting there when Choi arrived. Barefoot. Soaking wet. Couldn't speak. Came out, but not the same way he went in. The sea caves on the north shore of San Miguel Island are accessible at low tide. They go back further than you'd think. And in the deepest one, carved into the stone above the tide line, someone has been keeping count of something for a very long time. I never found out what they were counting. I'm not sure I want to know.